How is this still going on? This verse been going for way too long. If you ain't blind, you can see that this is wrong. And I won't comply. Not me, no way.
Good morning, everyone. Lots going on as usual. Bullied doctors and damaged school board trustee candidates. We've got a thread about that. And I've got a story about a doctor who is being taken to court by the CPSO, who's the Ontario licensing board for doctors, basically. And the allegations made are very interesting. There's a court date in January, and Swinwood is the lawyer, who is also Adam Skelly's lawyer. So, and I've seen him in a bunch of different things. So I'll be interested to see how this all plays out. Race and woke grift exposed and explained with examples. Yes, we're going to talk about Pierre Poilievre. Yes, they're already leaning into the white supremacy accusations. I called it on Friday, whatever day he won, or Saturday. And yes, they're already doing this. It's already happening. I wonder if the ads that Mr. Poilievre ordered are going to be enough to counteract the already smearing all over social media that all of the assets are already engaging in. One of the things I want to point out as well, I cover what happens. I don't have a really big say. In fact, I didn't vote for Pierre Poilievre or anybody for conservative leadership. I didn't get a membership. That didn't happen. I'm just reporting what happens and telling you what I think about what happens. And some people are pushing back, but there are people who are saying, any support of Poilievre is not good. He's a conservative, and the conservative is part of CPC, is part of the WEF, and even Harper sold us out, et cetera, et cetera. All of that may be true, but people are tired of trying to find the bad guy in the seemingly good guy, and they want hope. And I'm not saying that they're wrong, or that the people saying they're just going to betray you in the end after all is wrong. I'm saying that covering Canadian politics necessitates that I cover what happens in the CPC. And I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to tell you what I think about it. And I'm going to tell you what the regular person probably thinks about it, because that's kind of how I frame my show. And I think that it's important to talk about all of that. If I smell a rat, I'm going to tell you I smell a rat. If I feel a little hopeful, I'm going to tell you I feel hopeful, because jeepers creepers, there's not enough of that going around, right? And if Pierre Poilievre does well for Canada, you can't unring the bell. You can't go back in time. You can't undo the damage that's been done, but you can unleash productivity. You can undo the bad policies. And if Mr. Poilievre does a good job, and that's good for Canada, then that's good. I'm looking forward to that. Nothing's ever perfect. Nothing's ever what you exactly want on your wish list. It doesn't work like that, right? And so it doesn't work like that. You'd hope it works like that. You'd hope you could get to a better agreement, right? You'd hope that democracy would struggle to a consistently better agreement. But it seems time after time, we have to go through periods of garbage like we're going through right now, instead of getting to that more perfect order. We go through garbage, and then we fix it, and we get to a place where things seem kind of like, yeah, we really got this. Maybe we'll get to that really good place, right? That utopia, right? But it's not really, because there's always constantly changing needs and wants, and that's why you can't get to utopia, right? But instead of struggling to that pinnacle, we have to fix a whole bunch of problems and go through difficult times and blah, 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 blah. And you hope the difficult times don't get too bad. So I hope Pierre Poilievre does well. I really do. I hope that he does well, because if he does well, then Canada does well. And when there are good times, embrace them, right? Because it's not guaranteed to come again. So jeepers creepers. I don't know. Lockdown for mourning. The Queen is dead, and she's lying in state, and there's a whole big lockdown in the UK. You'd think that would not be the case, but it is the case. And there's so much more news as well. There's a whole bunch of stuff we got to get to. So let's get to it. First, if you want to support the show, head over to CanadaPoly.com. You can do a one-time payment or a monthly subscription. You can check out my book or the merch, or you could click on this link here if you shop at Amazon and you want to support the show that way. You can sign up for Kitchen Table Talks. Check out Locals if you're interested in that. And if you want to see all the links I used before I build the show, check out CanadaReport.co. And let's get into it. Here's Poilievre's win. It was a big win. He got 68% of the points, and this is in the round one. Just in case you haven't seen or understand how big the win was, Aaron says, I just skimmed it riding by riding, but I counted Poilievre won around 330 of 338 ridings. He won most with 60 or 70 or 80%. Total landslide coast to coast. I mean, wow. He had energized rooms across the country. That's not done often. It's not done often in Canadian politics. It just isn't. And so he won that election handily. He won that. I don't know if there's a comparison. Stephen Harper, maybe. This is a united Conservative Party. And this is probably, well, if there's an election, if he continues communicating as well with the Canadian public as he communicated with the Conservative Party of Canada, then he's going to win the next election if everything's above board. And who knows, right? I thought John Charest was going to win it until Mr. Poilievre did. So we'll see. Proof's in the pudding. We'll see in the next election, I guess. But Evan Solomon says, once the numbers are really crunched and this Pierre Poilievre victory will really come into focus, it is massive. He owns the party in a way not seen since the Harper days at its peak. He swept almost every riding. The Quebec numbers will be key to look at. Right. So if he can break through Trudeau's kind of hold on Ontario and Quebec, then he's going to win a bigger majority. Who knows? And Zachary says, this is Poilievre country. Now, that didn't work out, right? When everybody kicked Harper out and decided that Mr. Trudeau was the guy, that didn't work out in the long term, right? Looking back, kind of kick yourself, don't you? I certainly do. So this is Poilievre country. It seems that the entire Conservative, all of the ridings went with Mr. Poilievre. He was doing the work too. This is the kind of stuff that you do need to be doing. This is the job of the leader of the opposition, and the job of the prime minister as well, to be making inroads and discussing with people. That's why Trump worked from a phone, right? He was on the phone all the time, calling people, getting jobs, getting plants, jobs created, finding out what barriers were in the way from having places like GM open a plant in Michigan or something else. He would be on the phone talking to the CEOs of these places, using his position to benefit people in different ridings. And whether that was political or he just felt like that was his job. And I'm sure that he did other things too, but the phone was the bread and butter of Trump's presidential desk. He didn't have a laptop, right? As far as I saw anyway. Maybe he did, but it wasn't the focus. He had 2 phones, maybe 3 phones. I can't remember. Anyway, Jennifer says, glad to see this. Encouraging words from Chief Billy Morin. Sorry if I got that wrong. Pierre Poilievre's work over the last while, reaching out, taking time, seeking advice from Indigenous leaders across Canada on federal Conservative Indigenous relations, has planted seeds for effective policy action moving forward. Looking forward to continuing to build on that work. So one of the things that Mr. Poilievre talked about was ensuring that there was a partnership for building pipelines and making sure that it enriched the lands where it went through, and so on and so forth, and doubling down on getting out of dictator oil. Although somebody mentioned he didn't talk about Alberta oil, he talked about Newfoundland oil. And there was another thing. Hold on, it's important, and I want to mention it. Batteries and climate change and technology. So the climate change stuff, yeah, I mean, the Conservative Party has signaled that every O'Toole said no, don't worry about it, and then took a big right turn when he took the leadership, right? Pierre Poilievre mentioning climate change isn't a surprise to me. The battery thing is a surprise to me. I'll wonder if he's going to take an exit on that, because I don't think batteries make any kind of sense when you look at lithium mining and you understand the sheer numbers involved. I could see them trying to influence Mr. Poilievre to lean into the battery thing and say, we'll build batteries in Canada and we'll use those jobs, et cetera. But again, a 4,000% increase in materials, 400 to 4,000% increase in lithium needed, cobalt, all of this other stuff. I think it excludes it. So I think it excludes it from being viable. And if you're in a battery car on the 401 in a snowstorm, bumper to bumper, and your car battery dies because it's freezing, and the battery dies because you've been in there for 3 hours or whatever, and it's not moving and it's not getting any better. That's not good. That's less good than a gas car. I don't think that electric vehicles are on par. Anyway, regardless, there were issues, and there are issues with the Conservative Party. I've pointed it out many times. I've talked about it ad nauseum. I was supportive of Mr. Bernier when he left the Conservative Party. But again, if it's good for Canada, then the quickest stop to the artery bleeding that we're doing right now, that's paramount. And can we get better? I mean, I hope so. I hope we can. It seems unlikely in this kind of environment at this point, right? It really does. Do you think it seems likely to say Mr. Bernier will win the next federal election in this political climate? I don't. I think it would be the same as saying Elizabeth May is going to be the prime minister. I just don't see it. Right. So in this kind of situation, even with the issues, it seems like Mr. Poilievre is better than Justin Trudeau. And I don't know that saying we should all get behind this is a reasonable solution at this point, even if it's true, because people just won't. We have to deal with the reality. And people say, well, if you say they won't, but they won't. I'm sorry, they won't. They haven't up till now. And so why would they suddenly go, Elizabeth May, we should all elect you, or Mr. Maxime Bernier, we should all elect you? I don't see it. I don't see the change. I don't see the movement like that. I do see a movement for Mr. Poilievre. That's what I see. Here's Milkman himself, Andrew Scheer, congratulating Mr. Poilievre and bending the knee. He says, just inflation's terrible and we're going to give people their lives back and their freedom back. The messaging behind the Conservative Party under Poilievre is much improved because it's simple and people like it. And the messaging is basically, we're going to give you your freedom back, the freedom to live your life. That's it. And is that sellable right now? The ArriveCan app, the COVID restrictions? Yes, it's sellable. Holy smoke, it is. Yes, absolutely it is. So if that's the kind of, brain. Sorry, everybody's brain. I got a couple of emails and a couple of messages like, can you send me the brain image? So the brain image is here. Do you want to watch it? I don't know. I'll put it in the health section. Hold on a second. I got to move it. I was going to do this is your brain. And then this is your brain on Canadian politics with the top pulled off and like all this stuff. But I just couldn't do that. So I'm sorry. I'm not going to show it again. Go and then do this is your brain on Canadian politics. You'll understand the second point when you see it. It's the part where the top comes off and you see what's in the brain. But I'm not going to do that to you people. I'm sorry that I showed you the brain without warning. Apologies. I forgot what I was going to say about the conservative politics to tie it all up. But fundamentally, there's nothing that I could do that would influence enough people that it's going to change anything. And I think that that's true of like any pundit or newspaper or television, whatever. They can influence a lot of people, but there's nobody who can say, I'm going to make this person win, or I'm going to put this person in office. Maybe 100 years ago you could. You could do that to a mayor in New York or something like that. You could do that to certain things. But a person like me can't do that. I don't have that power. Maybe somebody who owns Dominion can, but I can't, right? And it's interesting to see all of the people behind Mr. Poilievre. And now here's the reversal, okay? The attacks begin. This is exactly what's happening. Bavik says, Pierre Poilievre keeps getting accused of racism. I've not seen one reputable example of this. It's been said he engages in white supremacist thought, whatever that is. I'll break down what I think is happening in a quick thread. Now, I want to make sure you understand what is happening because I'm gonna bring up woke ideology to tie this off. And in this, they are clearly identifying Pierre Poilievre and tying him to racism. And it's exactly the same thing they did to Mr. Bernier, okay? What they're doing is identifying the bad thing. And they're saying, Mr. Poilievre is this bad thing we're identifying. Mash, mash, mash. That's what they're doing with these repeated attacks. The identification of defining the bad thing and tying him with it is the job of the propaganda. That's it. So when you start thinking of Mr. Poilievre, you'll start thinking all of these pre-triggered words, pre-programmed words and the programming is happening now because anytime Mr. Poilievre is mentioned, they use these words. Okay. So I'm using them just to illustrate a point. Maybe I'll read this thread first to understand how they want to stay in the shadows. They don't want, they being the woke people, the ideologically extreme people who we're talking about here. And it's defined in the thread, but I think you'll understand who I'm talking about. And then we'll go through all the racist attacks that Mr. Poilievre is going through. This is done for a purpose. It is done so Poilievre is defined and out in the open, and the woke ideology is muddy, undefined. And because it's undefined, you can't pick that idea up and examine it. You can't say this woke idea here because they say, hold on, that's not what that is. And then you say, okay, this anti-racist idea. Oh, hold on, that's not what that is, right? So every time you try and identify it, they say, no. But Mr. Polyev is being clearly identified and tied with bad things. You see how we're losing, right? It's all because of camouflage. Okay, so let's go through this thread, and then we'll go back and look at the attacks Mr. Polyev is undergoing. This is from Twitter, but this is put together by Not the Bee, which is a Babylon Bee Twitter clone, which is interesting. This thread defining woke is an absolute must-read for anyone wanting to fight back against the postmodern madness. The thread is reproduced on the website, but you've got a link to the thread, to the original thread here. Okay, we're not allowed to call it anything. It, of course, is wokeness. Now, before Benjamin S. Watson, tagging for honesty, says I can't define it, let me go ahead and define it and then explain the game that's being played when we are told that we cannot define woke. Wokeness is the alloy of critical theory and postmodernism as applied by the left to social justice broadly construed. You know, when someone says something like, quote, white privilege is a product of systemically racist social structures which center whiteness and marginalized people of color while reproducing white supremacy. This reinforces dominant power structures and cultural hegemony that benefits cisgendered heterosexual white males at the expense of BIPOC, Latinx, and LGBTQS2+ folks. The ideology behind that is what we call woke. We've seen that jargon coming from people with similar views, politics, and ideas, all demanding sweeping social change from the left. There's clearly a coherent worldview at work, but every time we try to give that worldview a name, they say the name we pick is problematic. And then here's a bunch of examples of that happening. This prevents people from being able to talk about the project of social, cultural, and political change coming from the left. They want to agitate, advocate, and demand social change without acknowledging, much less defending, the worldview at the center of their project. They want to behave as if their worldview is so obvious that it should be taken for granted and accepted without debate. They will even tell you that they want to change society, change the world, and change culture. So why can't we give your name or your movement a name? I'm going to explain what's going on using zebras as an analogy. Trust me, this will explain it perfectly. It does. Many animals have fur, feathers, or skin that blends into the environment. This acts like camouflage so they can blend in and hide. The owl is a fine example. Zebras, however, are different. They're covered in black and white stripes, and even though the environment they live in is mostly brown and green. If you see a zebra by itself, it's very easy to see. It's like they have a neon sign over them that says, "Lions, please eat me." But zebra stripes don't help zebras blend into the environment. They help them blend into the herd. Zebras camouflage works by making zebras blend in with the herd so that lions can't focus on any one zebra and target it. If a lion can't pick a target, the zebras are safe. See? Scientists discovered this as they studied zebras and got confused about which zebra was which because the zebras all looked alike and blend into the herd. They tried to fix this by tagging a zebra with red paint so they could recognize it from the others. Guess what happened? The lions killed the zebra. The tagged zebra. A tagged zebra stands out from the herd, so lions can tell it apart and focus the hunt on it. Lions don't catch weak zebras, they catch the identifiable zebras they can focus on. This is a great analogy for the game that the woke are playing. Once a worldview is named and defined, it can then be pointed out, highlighted, and subjected to criticism. Once you can identify a worldview or set of ideas, you can focus on it. Naming an idea lets us separate it from the herd of other ideas and examine it up close. The woke don't want anyone to be able to give a name or label to their ideology, because if that happens, we can tag examples of their ideology with a label when we see it. This allows us to highlight it, point it out, and examine it when we see it. They don't want that. We label and name things to help us tag them so we can point them out and focus on them. The woke are trying to desperately to destroy all of our linguistic tags. They don't want us to be able to single out their ideas and subject them to criticism. They want to embed their ideas into the culture in a way that makes those ideas a part of the social fabric. They want to bake these ideas into the culture, and they do not want us criticizing and examining those ideas before those ideas become embedded into our social fabric. Woke ideas, this is an example of this, would be pronouns in profiles, which I'm seeing in professional situations now. They want this to become cultural so that you identify your pronouns as a matter of course, despite the fact that there's no technology available to change someone's gender. If you're born male, you are male. There's nothing special about cutting off a sexual organ other than the fact that we're committing sexual organ mutilation that will change your gender. There's nothing I know of anyway. Does anybody know of any books or any literature that talks about the magic of cutting off a penis to make you a woman? Please send reading my way, because I'm very interested in this. Also, are there any studies comparing the practice of female genital mutilation to what's happening with the gender mutilation in the West? I'd be very interested in something like that. Matt Walsh, where are you, man? Anyway, regardless of that, I think that it's very interesting that these ideas are trying to become embedded in our society right under our nose. And because you can't say what the heck's with the pronouns in your profile there, dude. Well, you can, but then you get attacked, right? Because as intolerant or something, despite the facts of the matter. So it's very interesting to see all of this play out right there in front of you. Here we are, right? This is a culture war, and we've got cannons, we've got all sorts of people willing to fight, but nothing to fight at and punch into air, right? And anything that you do put out to fight, they use that against you. Very interesting, right? You have to think. It's very, very interesting what's going on. Okay, woke ideas really can't withstand proper rational and logical analysis. The lines of reason, evidence, logic, rationality, etc. will eat the zebras of wokeness, critical race theory, and critical social justice for lunch if the lines of reason can focus on and identify the woke zebras. I think it's funny that they make the zebras the woke ones. Back to the article. And this is what the woke want to avoid. The woke think our criticisms are not legitimate, just an attempt by us to attack them so we can hold on to power and privilege. For that reason, the woke seem to insulate themselves from our illegitimate criticism. So to avoid getting eaten by the lions of reason, the woke want to mix their ideology into society and have it blend in so it becomes just another part of the social fabric. They don't want wokeness to be seen, pointed out, highlighted, or, in woke parlance, made visible. So you can't point it out, and so you can't do anything about it, and so it continues and it becomes part of the culture, and you lose because you can't do anything about it, right? They want to hide their worldview by making it impossible to focus on, impossible to tag, label, or name, so they can say they're just doing history or just discussing gender, and blend in as though wokeness fits right alongside reason, evidence, logic, and rationality. Using labels like woke, CRT, and critical social justice lets us tag woke ideas so we can hold them up to the light and examine them, helping us point out wokeness to other people so they can see it too. That is what the woke want to avoid. This is important. They want to act like all the bits of woke activism we see are an unconnected phenomenon spontaneously springing forth in the name of justice in an undefinable way, when in fact woke activism is the fruit of a well thought out and clearly defined worldview. This is why they are so desperate to discredit any word, term, or phrase we use to name, label, point out, or highlight the woke ideology. Do not let them do this. Do not let them play games and use linguistic and rhetorical sleights of hand to hide their worldview. These woke people who have labeled everyone they disagree with as racist, bigot, sexist, white supremacist, Nazi fascist, transphobe, homophobe, Christian nationalist, ableist, misogynist, anti-black, absolutely do not get to complain about being labeled as woke. Label, name, highlight, and point out their ideas, label fairly, use labels from their literature, but label those woke ideas and then subject those woke ideas to the bright light of rigorous criticism and analysis. I love that it says fight them by being rational and sensible. Please definitely do. Okay, so let's get back to Bavik's tweet about Mr. Polyev being attacked as racist. Right now, Pierre Polyev is well-known in political and conservative circles, but is less well-known to the majority of Canadians. He's probably vaguely known as the guy who's always talking about inflation or deficits. Yes, even now, the majority of Canadians don't pay attention. So he hasn't solidified his image in most Canadians' minds. This presents a unique opportunity to tarnish his name in the next month or two. It seems to be Pavlovian conditioning. Pavlovian conditioning was when the dogs were fed, they were ringing a bell, and then when they rang the bell, after giving them a couple of weeks probably a couple of days or whatever with the bell ringing, they'd ring the bell and the dogs would start salivating as if the food was coming, but no food would come, but the dogs would salivate anyway. The Pavlovian response is, I say Polyev, you say, right? And then that's when they build it in. That's all that happens. You start salivating for that delicious steak, right? You get that dopamine hit by knowing what's next, right? Yeah. They'll keep accusing him of being a white supremacist, so he's associated with that. The best example of this in Canadian politics is Stéphane Dion. I said, to be fair, Stéphane Dion could not speak English. And he did not understand English also. It would be like you going to a French debate and them asking you a question that you didn't understand and you trying to answer the question and then them saying, hold on, that's no, hold on, let me explain. It was terrible. Anyway, terrible stuff. Anyway, the best example, he says, Harper paid $5 billion in ads saying Stéphane Dion is not a leader. Even liberals thought he wasn't a leader because they heard the line so many times, and they heard it first before they had an image of him. To be clear, there's no evidence remotely of Pierre Poilievre being an actual racist. The danger is if this works, it gets immeasurably dirtier. Society becomes more polarized. Justin wins again. So call out bad actors when you see them. Right. Good luck. Good luck. Here's a bad actor, Globe and Mail. Pierre Poilievre's dominant win is the death knell of a moderate conservatism in Canada. Okay, thanks, the Globe and Mail. Here's more. He's Justin Ling, and Justin Ling is a recipient of the $600 million, I think, and is a far left activist, etc. He says Pierre Poilievre is not a white supremacist. He's not an anti-vaxxer. He's not an extremist. But up to this point, he's willing to use them to win in a brutal election. I think he genuinely believes that giving them an outlet is a constructive thing, which is a debatable point. Okay, so you're allowed to say them to anti-vaxxers or extremists as you define them? Okay. White supremacists, you can say them. I mean, interesting. Jeet says someone who is not a white supremacist but willing to use white supremacist ideas to win elections because he thinks it is a constructive thing to mainstream white supremacy is actually worse than someone who is a sincere white supremacist. It's like 4 times, right? 4 times on just that one tweet. And Jason Ling's tweet has a bunch of them as well. And I ask, which white supremacy ideas specifically? Be very specific, please. Please. No, he's not. There aren't. They're just smearing him. I'll be interested to see if we can put a stop to this madness. It's crazy. And I'm the one they want to silence? Brenda says, another of Trudeau's liberal propaganda press media so terrified of Poilievre, all in a frantic search for mud that will stick. Yes, Luke says, if there's any doubt about who Pierre Poilievre's biggest supporters are, his biggest applause line came after declaring he will end COVID restrictions. Poilievre's supporters began chanting freedom. Ah, yes, that right-wing dog whistle, freedom. Right, of course. Isn't that like written into somewhere? So I don't know. I can't remember. Alan says, he's responding to his own tweet. The first tweet says, the left is coarsening political debate in this country. It's why Canadians of all backgrounds are increasingly turning away from the toxicity of the so-called progressive parties. Yes, they are. The funny thing is, it's not conservatives who've imported American-style politics into Canada, as Justin Trudeau would have us believe. It's the Liberals and NDP machine, from guns and abortion to the fixation on racial and identity politics. That's what's actually divided Canadians, not Pierre Poilievre. And I think that that's a good point. It is not the right that's bringing in American style politics. It is definitely the left. And Alan says, he's responding to Ken. Ken says, I reject his stance on childcare, abortion, the right to wear a hijab or other cultural elements during citizenship ceremonies. I reject his racism, white supremacy, his ill-considered stance on Bank of Canada, monetary policy, the CBC, Indigenous rights, and the environment. And I hate his glasses. I think that's an instant block. I don't think that any of that is... This person's Mighty 580 AM. This guy's a radio guy. Media provide diverse opinions. Is he a blue checkmark? He's a radio guy. Poor guy. Anyway, Alan says, this is the kind of ill-conceived criticism Poilievre will be facing from now until the next election. And none other than Gerald Butts has admitted it is precisely the kind of hysteria over the top claptrap that could get him into the prime minister's office. And Vivian says the prime minister and his acolytes, likely advised by Butts, have worked hard to create this hysterical pitch with 7 years of divisive wedge identity politics. It's going to be tricky to pull back on that. They've created a class of deplorable alt-right fascist racists. They made their bed. Yeah. It's similar to the Upper Grand District School Board bringing up racism, but then getting upset when people bring up racism to them and say, well, you said this, and this goes against your policies, and this needs to be dealt with and reconciled, not ignored, and thanks for your opinion. So it's interesting. It's interesting when people push back on the racist ideology or the racist nonsense that's being pushed by these taxpayer governed and funded things like education. Here is T. Hudson. This made me howl. I think this guy's serious, but it doesn't really matter. He says he's looking at the picture of where Pierre Poilievre has his hand in his other hand, and he's smiling at the camera in his library, I guess. And he says, it is known in the body language field that holding your hands clenched up to your face like this is a negative sign. And it also is a sign that the person is going to be difficult to deal with. This is an interesting accusation, the difficult to deal with, because it's really difficult to define. What's a difficult to deal with person? Somebody who doesn't get back to you on time, somebody who's argumentative, somebody who's rude, somebody who's smelly maybe, right? Like all of these things. So it's very undefined. It's kind of up to you to internalize what that means. It's such a good smear, but these people are doing it just to damage him for no real reason. I doubt that this person knows anything about Mr. Polyev at all. He's going by the hands being clenched in this picture. It's crazy. And Lou had a picture of Justin Trudeau doing exactly the same thing. Different hands are clenched, right? It's the reverse hand clench. And the response from the original guy, it says, but his head is down. That's an interesting concentration. Nice try. Oh, that's interest and concentration. Nice try. But the guy's just disingenuous. Like, this is the kind of ridiculous, baseless attacks that are going to be happening. Here's Mr. Polyev's wife, and she's on Twitter, and she says, here's 7 times Justin Trudeau met with pedophiles, terrorists, and extremists. Right? So, but nothing about that. Nobody's upset about that. Here's 5 times, and there are more than Justin Trudeau can remember of him wearing blackface. Nobody wants to know about that, but they're very interested in Mr. Polyev's picture pose. He's going to be hard to work with, don't you know, right? Amber says, Pierre Polyev is a racist, conservatives are racist, the truckers are racist, the convoy supporters are racist, the unvaccinated are racist, anyone who blinks is a racist. When did Canada become so ridiculous? It is. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's beyond the pale. But the thing is, it's all about branding. Trump was really good at branding. Trump was great at branding, right? Nervous Nancy and all sorts of wonderful nicknames. Rocket Man. There were so many good nicknames, right? And it works because people develop that shorthand to talk about things, and then people get branded that way. The right has not been great at being coordinated on their messaging, at working together, at communicating. The right hasn't been great in Canada for a long time. So maybe Mr. Polyev will usher in a new era of better communication on the right in both French and English. Who knows, right? Because he can speak French very well. Here's Mr. Bernier. He says, I didn't wait until the Freedom Convoy to suddenly decide that we must protect our fundamental rights and freedoms. For 2 years, I was touring the country, getting arrested and being given tickets for holding supposedly illegal rallies. Yeah, that sucks. It sucks. But I don't know that attacking Polyev is the way to fixing the bad representation, the maligning in the press, all of the terrible things that happened to the People's Party. I don't know that that's Mr. Polyev's fault for staying quiet. In a political party, you can disagree in the caucus room. You can disagree in the, like if you're in cabinet, you can disagree while they're having a debate about it. But once the decision is taken, you go out and you pull the party line, and that's what you do. And that's how politics works. And Bernier knows that. So I just think this line of attack is interesting. It's not Bernier's line of attack. This is People's Party of Canada, Toronto, account. So, but I've heard this, and I don't know that it's a viable complaint. I'm very hopeful that we could have 2 conservative parties that have valuable things to bring to the table. I'm hopeful that Mr. Polyev doesn't use his time or energy to focus on attacking Mr. Bernier. And I'm hopeful that Mr. Bernier doesn't use his time or energy to attack Mr. Polyev, because they're stronger if they work together, and not together in partnership, but together in common goal, together in let's do our best to put our policies forward, to communicate what our political parties are about, etc. And because I think that you could have a robust conversation between Bernier's financial experience and Polyev's ability to communicate, right? You could have a very powerful government and opposition in those 2 parties, right? And you wouldn't have to deal with the nonsense of the NDP or the Liberals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You could have disagreements that seemed productive, right? And I'm hopeful that maybe that's the core of it. I'm hopeful that we can find disagreements on the conservative side that are not petty like that was, right? Like, oh, I was fighting for 2 years while you were quiet. Yeah, there's a reason he was quiet, and everybody who knows anything about politics knows it. So find a line of attack where you can constructively fix something. Do case studies, talk about case. It sounds kind of boring, right? But it shows people how you would actually do something. But attacking Mr. Poilievre or the Conservative Party, I mean, if they behave as they did under O'Toole, then you can say, yeah, well, they're the same thing as the Liberals and there's no difference. And you can maintain that attack line. But if they're behaving different than they behaved under O'Toole and Scheer, then you need a different attack line because people aren't going to believe you. And it looks like Poilievre's message is resonating. So you need, as a party, politically, PPC needs to respond to that. They can't just behave as if Poilievre hasn't put together a great campaign and resonated with a lot of Canadians. I think that's tone deaf, right? So the ball is in Bernier's court to respond appropriately. I thought that his tweet yesterday that I showed you, where he said, looking forward to debating you, that's great. That's wonderful. I hope it's constructive. I hope that the debate is meaty and I think we could do this. I think we could do, I think we could build capacity in our oil fields to set a price at the pumps. And I think we could do it in 8 years after doing Poilievre's plan of getting off dictator oil in 5 years or 4 years or whatever it is, right? Why not push him, right? Do that. Use your position in the conversation to push him that way rather than attack him and get ignored. That's my opinion. CBC New Brunswick. Let's talk about health. I don't know. I took too long on Poilievre. 36 minutes. That's a long one. Sorry, everyone. But it's important. It's not just Poilievre. They've done the same tactics to everybody, and they're doing the same tactics to anybody who is in opposition to these stupid policies, right? And so it's not just Poilievre that is suffering. He's just going to be the latest victim of this smear campaign that seems to work super well. It sunk Bernier. It really did. It really did. It really stuck. People really are hesitant to that party because they think it's extremist. And it's not. It's not extremist by any stretch of the imagination. It's a common sense party. But the smear worked, right? And if Poilievre allows the smear to work against his Conservative Party, more fool him. I hope he's not so foolish. So we'll see. We'll see. CBC Vancouver, the decline of New Brunswick, excuse me. The decline and destruction of our healthcare system is accelerating a little bit. Rape victim turned away from Fredericton ER, told to make appointment for the next day. Just don't have a shower or anything. We'll see you tomorrow. Really? Pretty wild. The bullying of healthcare. This is a nurse in Washington State, and she's talking about the bullying and coercion in her job, and she got both shots. But I wanted to show you this before I showed you what the CPSO is doing. It's not just coworkers bullying each other. It is employees bullying each other, employers bullying each other, and forcing people to participate in this injection campaign against their better judgment, against their will. It's wild. Here we go.
My name is Prada. I'm a nurse in the state of Washington, and this is my story. I was bullied and coerced in fear of losing my job into taking the first dose of the COVID vaccine. After the first dose, I had such a serious adverse reaction that affected my heart that my primary care provider advised me not to take any more doses of the vaccine, and she signed a medical exemption form. My employer approved this medical exemption form, but due to Governor Jay Inslee's mandate, I was removed from the schedule. I lost my job over this vaccine, and I regrettably took the second dose of the vaccine to get my job back. My reaction was significantly worse the second time. My blood pressure went up to 140 over 110 and had multiple other side effects. After a full cardiac workup, I was told that this chest pain that I get that wakes me up during the night is just a prolonged side effect of the vaccine. I'm no longer living in fear of the repercussions about speaking the truth about this vaccine. Now I'm seeing children that are getting vaccinated coming in to the hospital having multiple reactions to it, and I'm seeing that providers are turning a blind eye or believing that there is not enough evidence for them to even report it for the vaccine reaction site. And I'm tired of being silent. And this is our time to speak up and speak the truth about this vaccine. It is not safe for anyone to take it.
So there's a whole bunch of people who are very concerned about the data that's coming out. And yet, in Ottawa, Ottawa Citizen reporting, Ottawa doctor refusing to cooperate with investigation into COVID medical practices college. Dr. Mary Elizabeth O'Connor is one of 4 Ontario doctors against whom the regulatory body for physicians has initiated legal action. An Ottawa doctor who referred to COVID-19 vaccines as gene therapy experiments. Listen to the positioning of this article, okay? They're trying to position this doctor as a crackpot. Really. Gene therapy experiments is being taken to court by the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario after failing to cooperate with an investigation into inappropriately issued medical exemptions. Dr. Mary Elizabeth O'Connor is one of 4 Ontario doctors against whom the regulatory body for physicians has initiated legal action. It has asked the Ontario Superior Court of Justice to order them to comply with investigations by the college. The investigation started after the college received information that each had inappropriately used or issued exemptions from COVID-19 vaccines. How does the college judge that? What information does the college have if they don't have patient records, and in this case they don't, to judge that she inappropriately handed out COVID-19 vaccine exemptions? If they don't have access to any kind of records about it, how can they make that determination, right? And like if they have an exemption and they have a patient who got the exemption and they say, can we understand how you got the exemption? And the patient says, no. How would they determine if it's inappropriate or not? The College of Physicians doesn't have unfettered access to all of the medical documents of all patients across Ontario. Why would they need that, right? They're governing medical doctors, right? Right. Back to this. The college says O'Connor obstructed an investigation to determine whether she had committed an act of professional misconduct in her general medicine and psychotherapy practice. And in her conduct, the investigation includes her conduct in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic and her completion of medical exemptions for COVID-19 vaccinations and diagnostic testing. According to the legal documents, Dr. O'Connor obstructed the college's investigations and refused to provide medical records and patient information requested by the investigators. She also took the position that the college must define COVID-19 and that she will not be able to move forward without the college's precise definition of COVID-19, according to the college. She also requested the college to, quote, advise if it knows the ingredients of the gene therapy experiments, the so-called vaccinations being administered to humanity without informed consent. O'Connor's lawyer, Michael Swinwood, said that she will fight the case in court. Quote, I don't see the need for an investigation. There's no malpractice or incompetence involved. A hearing is set for January, he said. That's going to be an interesting one. It'll get spicy, right? Here is anti-grifter. He says, I thought I'd make a quick thread to capture the week that Dr. Neely had, Ontario's most unhinged COVID grifter. And this one's running for Ottawa School Board Trustee Council, or School Board Trustee, and pretty wild stuff. It all started off with Dr. Neely coincidentally holding a vaccination clinic yet again on a statutory holiday on Labor Day. Doctors are paid $220 an hour in Ontario to work in a vaccination clinic on holidays. This one was for aged 5 to 11 booster shots. On September 6th, Neely appeared on the agenda with Steve Paikin to debate COVID restrictions with Acting Medical Officer of Health of Halamed, Norfolk, Dr. Matthew Strauss. Before the panel aired, Dr. KM must have known it didn't go well for her because she tried to get ahead of it on Twitter, and the tweets are pretty unhinged. She says, good grief. Interview began with me having to explain to the agenda why I wear a mask in clinic. I talked about leaders who shirk their responsibility regarding COVID-19 preventative and abatement strategies. Health policy shouldn't be shaped by willful ignorance. Ableism airs at 8 and 11. They are 8 and 11, 8 Eastern, 11. Doesn't matter. They asked me to speak, and yes, I'm passionate, but angry that Ontario neglected our youngest and oldest patients, PWDs, vulnerable population, essential workers, healthcare workers. This autumn is brought to you by minimizers. The panel was one for the ages. Dr. KM launched into a diatribe laden with slurs because Dr. Strauss appeared in person wearing his face while she appeared remotely and seemingly dressed to decontaminate her office with a sandblaster. You can watch how that went here. And it's if you haven't watched it yet, go watch it. I aired it a few times and it's something else. It is something else. There's also video of her in her office with a photographer in December with no mask on. So she makes an argument that it's not safe in her office without a mask because she's between patients, etc. But in her office in December, it was safe without a mask. So weird, right? Anti-grifter continues. He says, unable to just let it go, the following day, Dr. KM felt it was necessary to seek out the Twitter account of Steve Pakin's wife and accuse her of not caring about people who died with COVID and conspiring against her. So this is Pakin's wife, and she says, I now know of 7 people who had COVID in the last week. 1 was over 80, 2 over 75, including 1 with COPD. 2 over 60 were not vaxxed, 2 in their 30s, all mild symptoms and all over it. Time to learn to live with it. And the doctor responds with, so this is who S. Pakin is married to? And you clearly don't give a darn about all the people who have gotten seriously sick, all the people who've died. You'd think it's time to live with long COVID. So glad you aren't a doctor. So that agenda interview was your idea? So she felt like she was set up for that interview, I guess. It gets worse, Anti-Grifter says. On September 9th, Dr. KM, apparently still suffering from sudden onset paranoia, replied to a tweet posted by Ottawa Health about the tragedy in an Indigenous community in Saskatchewan by claiming they weren't doing enough about her victimization. So this is the tweet by Ottawa Public Health. They say, we'd appreciate if you join us for a moment of reflection. It's been a week and we'd like to acknowledge that. Many of us in particular, members of the Indigenous community, have been dealing with emotions from the events in Saskatchewan earlier this week. And Dr. KM says, it'd be helpful if you also acknowledge that your own local doctor is under attack, nasty anti-Semitism and violent threats. Just for once, stand up and say it isn't all right. Just for once, be a mama bear for me, like I am for patients in our city. You can say something. That was supposed to be a whistle that just turned into me blowing into the mic. So sorry about that. Anti-Grifter says, finally, as well as a bleak reminder, Dr. Can is one of 2 candidates running for the Ottawa Catholic District School Board trustee in Ottawa Zone 9. Comedically, she claimed her opponent was parked across the street in a Ford Ram. She received so much grief over that tweet that she deleted it. So there you go. Pretty wild stuff to have all of these people who think they're doing good so damaged by the rhetoric that's been everywhere over COVID. And it hasn't helped anybody. It hasn't kept anybody safe. It's done that to people. People are more frightened, terrified now than they've ever been, than I've ever known them to be. And it doesn't make any sense. And people who aren't are so over it. They just want to move on with their lives. Thank goodness. Here is Ethical Skeptic. And he says, you must understand that long COVID is a mechanism being employed to deflect liability. It's a pseudo theory in that it explains everything and anything and nothing all at the same time. We were denied treatment in order to preserve the emergency use authorization. It's malpractice, not an accident. They're talking about ivermectin. They're talking about things that we could have done that we didn't do, and preserving the emergency use authorization. Sorry, there's the brain again. Apologies. I said I wouldn't do that. I didn't mean to. It's gross. They cut it. They cut the top of it, and then they open it up. I don't know. I mean, be skeptical. It's the internet. I have no idea where that brain came from. But, right, have a look and just be like, and I mean, they could have put anything in there. It could be candy, right? I've seen movies where I'm like grossed out and somebody says, oh, no, look, it's just this. And then you look at it and you go, oh, yeah, that really is just like Skittles or something like that. It's not a gory wound. It's just Skittles put there. Never mind. Wall Street Silver says, U.S. Army recommends food stamps for soldiers struggling with inflation. That seems like a great idea. Isn't there some charity you could go and ask for? I mean, it's not like we're asking you to fly across the world and kill somebody and put your life on the line for us or anything like that. Pretty wild. The inflation is out of control. And it's so out of control that here's Douglas Todd. He says 61% of the city of Vancouver residents are considering leaving. Those most inclined to depart are Metro Vancouver right now are 18 to 34-year-olds, 71% via report on. Those are incredible numbers, incredibly disturbing. Who would they vote for? The price of houses. If you can't afford where you live, or your kids can't afford where you live, then how can you propagate your community, right? And if if growth is all based on bringing people in, how do you fight against balkanization of neighborhoods? How do you fight against all different languages taking over in specific areas? And the Brampton effect, right? There's massive neighborhood balkanization that's going on. It's not an integrated, everybody lives with everybody else and it's all mixed up. There are big neighborhoods of one group of ethnicity or something to that effect. And I don't think that's healthy in the long term. I think that's probably very unhealthy in the long term. And I don't know how you even begin to fix something like that, but it doesn't seem like a good idea, especially in Vancouver. Out west, there's a lot of the same style of thing, and same style of balkanization, same neighborhoods that are full of similar people or people who speak similar languages. And that's not helpful for the health of Canada going forward, I don't think. And again, I'm not against immigration, but when you have immigration that's fundamentally changing the neighborhoods in a country, we should probably have a conversation about it. We should probably say, is this the intention? Why are we replacing the people who used to live here with people who used to live in different countries? And how can we make sure that there's more representation of everybody in this mixed up melting pot rather than having balkanized communities of different ethnic groups? Because that's not good, right? So it'll lead to not good things. Very not good things. Housing tops transportation crime as most important among Vancouver voters survey, right? And yeah, the price of housing and it makes it so that you can't move on with your life. If you can't afford a house, if you're just barely getting by and can't afford your housing, then you're not secure enough to have a baby, or you're not secure enough to build your family or anything like that. And so without that ability to run a household on one income or whatever, if housing is 90% of your paycheck and you're just barely scraping by, you're not having babies. And that's important, right? Like, needs to be talked about. Moving on, this is a bit out of order, so apologies about this. I came across this article yesterday. 17-year-old high school football player dies in his sleep. And when I read this article about how he was found, etc., it made me think of Sean, of Answers for Sean. And here it is. A senior football player at Rahway High School died in his sleep Thursday morning, according to a statement posted to the team's Twitter account. It's with great sadness and a heavy heart that we are sharing the unfortunate passing of Rahway senior football player Ali Muhammad. The Rahway football team wrote, "Our hearts go out to the family during this tough time. You will forever be in our thoughts." And so he was okay the day before, and he went to bed, and he didn't wake up. And the similarities between these two. So here's Sean, and this is the guy who runs the Answers for Sean Twitter account. It just has such a echo, right? And it's like, I can't believe that there isn't anybody really getting to the bottom of all of this. Nobody's really investigating all of this. But I said that before. Here is climate very quickly. Canada's crumbling roads are getting worse in climate change, but Alberta oil may be the answer. I thought it was kind of funny because we're spending tax dollars on Ukraine and on hotels for refugees and on drugs for addicts and all sorts of stuff like that. But municipally, we're not really fixing roads. We were supposed to build a highway between Guelph and Kitchener. Highway 78 was supposed to be extended, and it was supposed to be an actual highway rather than a 2-lane road, because Guelph and Kitchener are two pretty big cities, and a lot of people commute between the two, and the tiny little road that services that has been over capacity for, I think, since 1995. But they've been talking about doing this forever. It was supposed to be done in 1999, and then Ernie Eves, I guess, or Mike Harris or Ernie Eves, somebody came in and said, no, it's too expensive right now. And then Dalton McGuinty came in, and it just never happened. And then nothing ever happened. So they're just not doing any of this kind of stuff. I don't think it has anything to do with climate change. The climate change thing is another Pavlovian. They're trying to do to climate change what they did to Trump, if that makes sense. Try to get a similar reaction, fear reaction, uneasiness reaction, right? They just had to put Orange Man bad, and people were like, oh no, what did he do again? Here is Justin Trudeau. He's asked about Mr. Poilievre's win on his way into the Liberal caucus retreat. Now, they were at a cabinet retreat, you see, earlier this week. They were at a cabinet retreat in Vancouver, I guess Vancouver Island, and it was very, ritzy ditzy, and people were having brunch meetings, that doesn't work, brunch meetings, and, it looked pretty, I don't know, snooty. And this is the caucus meeting. So this isn't cabinet, this is everybody. So, obviously they need to do this across the country in New Brunswick. And he's asked about Polyev on the way in. They said, what do you think about the Polyev win? And he says, beaucoup de travail, which means a lot of work. So there you go. That's it. You want to see it? Okay, here it is.
Beaucoup de travail à faire.
Yeah, so there you go. That's it. Interesting. Not really. What interests me more is, like, why do they need a caucus retreat and a cabinet retreat in two different locations, etc.? Couldn't they just do the cabinet retreat and then, like, add the caucus retreat to the end of the cabinet retreat, and then so you don't have to travel? Isn't global warming something or other that they want us to believe that it's a problem, but he's cool with flying across the country multiple times with his entire cabinet and then entire caucus? Okay, cool. Weird. Cool. Cool. Jeremy says, here's the UK mourning lockdown. Because of the royal period of mourning, you can't lock your bicycle to a bike rack in Norwich. It says, advanced warning. A royal period of mourning. This cycle rack will be closed from Friday the 9th of September until Wednesday the 21st of September. If you leave your cycle here between these times, it may be removed. We apologize for any inconvenience. The people who do the removing of the bicycle are working, but this bicycle rack is not working. How dare you put your bicycle here? We will employ people to come. This bicycle rack is holding the sign. We understand it's able to hold the sign, but it cannot hold your bicycle because it is not working. Okay. And we will employ somebody who costs money to come and remove your bicycle if you dare to leave it here, because it is time for this bicycle rack to have a break because of the Queen's death. I wish I was kidding. Yeah, right. Yeah. Here is Retail Insider. Britain is mourning the death of its longest serving monarch as its economy teeters on the brink of a recession, and it needs all the support it can get. Many British businesses have scaled back their operations out of respect. Yeah, so these measures could make life harder for a British economy that isn't exactly in a position to take days off. While a few days off business closures may not tip the UK into recession, it won't help matters. The Town of London, the London Zoo, the Legoland Windsor are among the businesses that closed on Friday, and the department store Segfried's, I said that wrong, will remain closed through the weekend. In the sports world, the Premier League is postponing games through next Monday, in addition to the many golf and horse racing events that have been adjusted. The British Fashion Council said the London Fashion Week would still go ahead, but that the shows on the day of the Queen's funeral will be cancelled. Further alterations could come in the mourning period leading up to the funeral on September 19th, which could see another uptick in business closures. That is highly likely, given King Charles said the day of the funeral will be a national holiday. In the U.S., where the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates to combat inflation, one might argue that a brief spending holiday could help ease price pressures and allow the Fed to scale back rate hikes. That's because while the U.S. could see energy prices rise in the coming months, the UK's are expected to skyrocket, potentially pushing inflation over 20% next year. Wild. Whether Brits cut back on their spending over the next week, energy prices and inflation are set to rise significantly. Less money flowing into the local museum or department store arguably only hurts those businesses and those who work for them. Well, yeah, still, it's not good. It's not good to have a lockdown because somebody's dead. I'm sure the Queen wouldn't have wanted the economy to be shut down like that, but here we are anyway. It doesn't really matter what she wants. She's dead, right? So, yeah, pretty wild. I think the most interesting part of today's show to me was the smears regarding Mr. Polyev, the similarity between all of them, the core messaging behind all of them is similar, and the idea that they're allowed to define the right any way they want, white supremacy, racist, alt-right, whatever they want. And they don't have to bring receipts. They can just say, oh, you are saying an alt-right. You think alt-right, right? And at that point, you're on defense. And instead of being able to deal with that, and you have to defend yourself. And then if you do begin to deal with it, if you say, well, hold on a second, your stated purpose is X, and this tweet here seems pretty racist. Hey, they say, hold on a second, you don't understand because you're so racist. You don't understand this progressiveness because this is progress. This is not racism. This is equality or whatever. And no, it's not, because the logic and reason, the lions of logic and reason, will eat those woke zebras. I hope. That's enough out of me. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. Check out Speaking Moistly and all the other stuff I do on there. And have a wonderful, wonderful day.